For over 100 years, one story has echoed through American families, from Georgia to California. A great-great-grandmother, high cheekbones, a name whispered at family reunions. Cherokee. Millions of Americans believe it. Some have built entire identities around it. And for the past decade, DNA testing has promised to finally answer the question once and for all. Spit in a tube, mail it off, and get the truth about your blood. But here is what nobody tells you before you take that test. The answer it gives you might be completely meaningless. And the real secret hiding behind Cherokee identity in America has almost nothing to do with your genes at all. Let's start with a number that should stop you in your tracks. In the year 2010, the United States Census counted more than 819,000 Americans who identified as having Cherokee ancestry. 819,000 people. But the actual number of enrolled citizens across all three federally recognized Cherokee nations combined is fewer than 400,000. That means the number of people who believe they are Cherokee is more than double the number of people who actually are. Where did the other 500,000 people come from? A historian at Virginia Commonwealth University named Gregory Smithers noticed this exact pattern in his own classroom, year after year. On the first day of his course on Native Americans in the South, he would ask his students if anyone had Native ancestry. Almost every semester, several students raised their hands and said the same thing: a great-great-grandmother, Cherokee, full blood, or close to it. Historians and anthropologists eventually gave this phenomenon a name. They call it Cherokee syndrome. So why Cherokee specifically? Why not another tribe? Researchers found a few real explanations. First, the Cherokee Nation is one of the most visible and successful tribal governments in the country, with a strong public presence in education, language preservation, and the arts, which keeps Cherokee history unusually alive in the American imagination. Second, in the 18th and 19th centuries, Cherokee communities intermarried with European settlers more than many other tribes did, which created real, documented, mixed ancestry in some families. But a third explanation is more uncomfortable. Anthropologist Circe Sturm, who spent years studying this exact question, argues that for many white Americans, claiming a distant Cherokee ancestor is a way of distancing themselves from the guilt of settler colonialism. She calls these people race shifters. Claiming an indigenous ancestor, even a fictional one, becomes a way of saying, my family were the victims too, not the perpetrators. And some of these family stories are not just exaggerated, they are completely invented. One genealogist spent years tracing a supposed Cherokee ancestor named Betsy Walker, a name that had been passed down through generations of one family as an unquestioned fact. After digging through court records, she found the truth. Around 1901, a man trying to get in on a legal settlement owed to Cherokee citizens invented the entire story out of nothing, hoping to cash in on a payout. There was no Betsy Walker. There never had been, but his descendants believed the lie for over a century and passed it down as sacred family history. Now here is where the story takes its first real turn. If so many people are searching for genetic proof of their Cherokee ancestry, DNA testing should be the perfect solution. Take the test, get your percentages, settle the family argument forever. Except the Cherokee Nation itself says that is not how any of this works. In 2018, Senator Elizabeth Warren released the results of a DNA test showing some evidence of Native American ancestry after years of criticism over her past claims of Cherokee heritage. The Cherokee Nation's response was immediate and it was blunt. Secretary of State Chuck Hoskin Jr. said that using a DNA test to claim any connection to a tribal nation, even vaguely, was, in his words, inappropriate and wrong. He went further. He said a DNA test is useless to determine tribal citizenship, and that current DNA tests cannot even reliably distinguish whether someone's ancestors were indigenous to North America or South America. Warren herself ultimately agreed with this distinction, stating that DNA and family history have nothing to do with tribal citizenship, which is determined only by tribal nations themselves. This is the part almost nobody understands. Cherokee Nation citizenship has nothing to do with a percentage on a genetic test. It is based entirely on paperwork. Specifically, it is based on something called the Dawes Rolls, a federal census taken between 1898 and 1906 that recorded the names of Cherokee citizens living in what would become Oklahoma. To become a citizen of the Cherokee Nation today, you do not need a blood quantum minimum at all. You need to document, with birth certificates and death records, a direct unbroken line back to a specific named ancestor on that roll. The Cherokee Nation's own registration office states plainly that DNA results, family photos, and general genealogy website research are not valid proof of ancestry and cannot be used for citizenship. A scholar named Kim Tallbear put it even more directly. There is no DNA test, she says, that can prove you are Native American. Indigenous identity was never a biological category. It is a political one, built on citizenship, culture, and lived community. So if DNA cannot answer the Cherokee question, what is the real mystery? What is the real secret this story is hiding? The answer is darker and far less discussed than any ancestry test. It involves slavery. By the year 1860, citizens of the Cherokee Nation collectively owned 2,511 enslaved black people. This is a part of American history that rarely makes it into textbooks. Some of the 5 civilized tribes in the southeastern United States, including the Cherokee, adopted the practice of chattel slavery from their white neighbors, and slaveholding became embedded in Cherokee society before removal. After the Civil War, the Cherokee Nation signed a treaty with the United States government in 1866. Article 9 of that treaty freed everyone the Cherokee Nation had enslaved, and it promised those formerly enslaved people, known as the Cherokee Freedmen, full and permanent citizenship rights in the Cherokee Nation, equal to those of native Cherokees by blood. For generations, the descendants of the freedmen lived as Cherokee citizens. Many of them had walked the Trail of Tears, alongside Cherokee families who had enslaved their ancestors. Then, in 2007, everything changed. Cherokee Nation citizens voted to amend their constitution, adding a requirement that citizens prove Cherokee blood. This single change instantly stripped tribal citizenship from roughly 2,800 documented freedmen descendants, cutting off their access to healthcare, education programs, and the right to vote or hold office within the nation whose treaty had promised them permanent belonging. The legal fight that followed lasted a decade. In August of 2017, a federal judge ruled decisively in favor of the freedmen descendants, stating that the Cherokee Nation could define its own citizenship however it chose, but had to do so, in his words, equally and even-handedly, with respect to native Cherokees and the descendants of Cherokee freedmen. The 1866 treaty, he ruled, was still binding. Then, in February of 2021, the Cherokee Nation's own Supreme Court went even further, striking the words "by blood" entirely from the tribal constitution. The court called that phrase, quote, "a relic of a painful and ugly racial past," and explicitly compared its effects to the racist Jim Crow laws that governed the American South for a century. Today, roughly 8,500 freedmen descendants are enrolled as full Cherokee Nation citizens, a status their ancestors were promised more than 150 years earlier and had to fight through American courts to finally receive. This is the darkest secret this story really holds. Not a hidden genetic marker, but a hidden history of enslavement, broken treaty promises, and a 21st century legal battle over who counts as family. And there is one more piece of hidden machinery behind all of this, something called blood quantum. Most people assume blood quantum, the fractional system used to measure someone's percentage of native ancestry, is an ancient tribal tradition. It is not. It was invented by the United States federal government, largely during the era of forced land allotment in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Legal historians who have traced its origins have found something chilling about its original purpose. Government officials believed that if blood quantum requirements were strict enough, intermarriage over several generations would eventually dilute native bloodlines below the legal threshold entirely, causing native nations to disappear. Not through violence, but through paperwork. Critics have called it a slow-motion, bureaucratic form of erasure, engineered to make entire nations legally vanish over time. Now let's return to the actual science, because there is a real DNA mystery buried underneath all of this. It is just not the one this video's title implied. Geneticists have spent the last decade mapping where Indigenous American ancestry truly comes from, using ancient DNA extracted from human remains thousands of years old. In 2018, researchers sequenced the genome of an infant girl whose remains were discovered at the Upward Sun River site in Alaska. Her DNA did not match either of the two major branches of Indigenous American ancestry known at the time. She belonged to an entirely unknown population, now called the Ancient Beringians, providing the first direct genetic evidence that a single founding migration crossed from Siberia into the Americas roughly 20,000 years ago, before splitting into the distinct lineages we recognize today. Even more recently, in 2026, an international team of geneticists published the largest genomic map of Indigenous American populations ever assembled, drawing on nearly 200 individuals from more than 50 populations across the Americas. Their findings revealed something genuinely new. Aside from a handful of Arctic populations, nearly all indigenous peoples of the Americas descend from a single major migration, roughly 15,000 years ago. But then, around 9,000 years ago, a second wave of migration partially replaced the descendants of that first group, reshaping the genetic landscape of an entire hemisphere in ways scientists are only now beginning to fully map. That is the real mystery DNA has helped crack. Not who counts as Cherokee today, but how an entire hemisphere of human beings came to be here in the first place, tens of thousands of years before anyone argued about blood quantum, before the Dawes Rolls, before a single ancestry testing kit ever shipped in the mail. So the next time someone tells you their great-great-grandmother was a Cherokee princess, you will know two things. You will know why that story exists, and you will know that no DNA test on Earth can prove or disprove it. Because in the end, being Cherokee was never about what is written in your blood. It was, and still is, about who your community claims, and who you claim in return. And that is a story far stranger and far darker than any DNA test could ever tell.